Okay.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Waterloo Filtration Institute's 4th webinar for education. This is Mitch McCurry, the Director of Sales at Waterloo. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar. We spend more than 90% of our time indoors, and during the COVID-19 pandemic, that time can sometimes easily increase at the end of the day. It's as important as ever to keep the indoor air as healthy as possible. This webinar will bring 2 experts together to discuss the challenges and strategies involved in managing indoor air quality in the COVID-19 era. Our webinar will be approximately 50 minutes in length with our 2 speakers, and we will have questions at the end of the webinar. You can direct your questions through the chat box or the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll answer those questions at the end of the webinar. I'd like to introduce our speakers. Next slide. Our 2 speakers will be Jim Rosenthal, Chairman and CEO of qlair Filters, and Dr. Ellie Amirnaser, CEO of qlair. Brief bio on Jim. Jim Rosenthal is the Chairman and CEO of qlair Filters. He is a certified air filtration specialist. He has over 20 years of experience in the air filtration and environmental controls industry and has been active in the National Air Filtration Association, serving as president in 2009 and 2010. As I said, he is a certified air filtration specialist by NAFA, and he is also involved in air filter test standards and is currently a voting member of the ASHRAE 52.2 committee. With that, next slide. I'd like to introduce Jim Rosenthal, CEO of qlair Filters. Jim?
Well, Mitch, thank you very much. I'm glad to accept your invitation to be here. It's always good to have a chance to talk about air filters and indoor air quality, and it seems to be the topic of the era that we're in. I have many friends that are in the indoor air world, and for years they talked up indoor air quality and the fact that people were inside 90% of the time and nobody listened to them, and now I can't even get a hold of them because they're on TV or radio or being quoted in the New York Times or whatever. So this is definitely an era of people being concerned about indoor air quality. So what are some of the steps that you need to do in order to lower the risk of the spread of COVID-19? That's really what we're looking at. How do you lower the risk? Just living, you know, obviously, if you lived in your house, never went outside, never went to the store, never got in your car, your risk would be pretty low. But that's not the life that we live, and very few people can do that. So what are the things to do? And these are things that all of us are familiar with. We've heard them many times, but wear masks. It's not a debate. You need to wear masks, period. Wash hands, be socially distant. It's very important to avoid crowds or stuffy rooms. And we'll talk a little bit about that, about what happens in rooms like that and how you raise your risk if you get into a crowd. If it feels like it's uncomfortable and stuffy, leave. Outdoors is better than indoors. There have been some pretty good studies showing that very few people who have contracted COVID-19 have done so outdoors. Almost every instance is somewhere involved with indoor exposure. Next thing is improve ventilation with as much outside dilution air as possible. And that means, if need be, opening windows or increasing the ventilation in HVAC systems that have outdoor air intakes. Right now, most of them were set at 20%. increase that if possible, but you need to get as much dilution air as you can. And then improved filtration. Both ASHRAE and CDC recommend MERV 13 or above if possible. We talked about this a little, and those of us in the filtration industry know what's going on, but once this recommendation came in, our market changed dramatically. Up until March or April of this year, MERV 13 and above filters represented about 5% of the market. These recommendations came, and all of a sudden it went to 40% of the market. So the demand is tremendous. It's very difficult to get MERV 13 and above filter media at this point. I know we have lots of customers that are waiting for filters, and there's not much we can do without the material, but hopefully there's some relief in the site in the next few months. We'll get through this situation of what I call toilet paper in March ×2. So we're going to do a little bit of an experiment here. I like to do some tests, and what we're going to do is we're going to take just a spray bottle with a salt solution in it. We're going to simulate a sneeze or a cough. And the interesting thing about this, and you can do it, it's really fascinating. It gives you a very quick view of what happens with a sneeze or a cough in indoor environment. Big particles come out as they're in the air. They literally disappear as they lose humidity or they lose moisture, and many of them fall out of the ground, fall out of the air to the ground. But that spray also creates a whole range of particles from over 100 microns to less than 1 micron. And there's still some dispute, but I don't know why. I mean, the 3 modes of transmission are droplets, surface contact, fomites, and aerosols. And aerosols are particles that stay in the air for extended period of times. So we're looking at aerosol particles contain COVID-19. We think it's somewhere in the 1 to 5 micron range. Now people say, well, COVID is actually 0.12 microns. Why would you say it's 1 micron? Remember, it is a virus. It needs a host to survive. So if you look at the math, it's very difficult to have enough food for this parasite, the virus, to exist without having at least 1 micron in size. So 1 to 5 microns is the range we're looking for. And that's our target particle range. And these particles stay in the air for an extended period of time. So we do our little spray. What happens? We're in a small 10 by 12 foot room. We've done our simulated sneeze. We've got 6 feet from the source and 10 feet from the source. And you see what happens with 5 micron, at 6 feet with 1 micron sized particles. These are all 1 micron sized particles. You get a dramatic increase, both at 6 feet and 10 feet. But here's the really interesting thing. Small, poorly ventilated room. This is why you need to stay out of rooms like this. Here's your start point. 13 minutes later, we still have a relatively high concentration in the room from 1 simulated sneeze. It just doesn't go anywhere. And it stays in the air, bounces off the walls, comes back, keeps the particle level high. On the other hand, if we go into a room, do the same thing, this room is 20 feet by 25 feet, 6 feet from the source and 10 feet from the source, you see that we still get a pretty good bump. But within 6 minutes, we're down to baseline. Those particles had a chance to disperse and go in all different directions. And you wind up with a relatively constant level. So if you're close to somebody in a big room, you're going to get some exposure at first, but after that, it's going to be pretty much the same as in the environment before. So let's put an air cleaner in a room. This to me is simulating what would happen in an airplane. An air cleaner, it's a HEPA air cleaner. It's going at 300 cubic feet a minute. This is that same little room, 10 feet by 12 feet. This gives you about 18 air changes an hour. Even with a HEPA air purifier going, at 6 feet, you got a pretty good increase. At 10 feet, you still have a pretty good increase. So the particles are going to stay there. So if you're in the next seat with somebody in an airplane, even with a really good air distribution system, an HVAC system in an airplane, you're still going to get some exposure if they sneeze. Now let's take the same room, and this time we have an air cleaner and we open the doors. Good ventilation. We get a little bit of a bump, but after that, and then by the way, the air cleaner is closer to the 6 foot, which is why you have a difference here. It's pretty constant. In fact, it goes down a little bit. So there's a premium for good ventilation, even with good filtration. We've got a HEPA air cleaner in there. In this case, I think it was going at 200 CFM, plus the doors open. Both of those things working together make a pretty good package. Okay, a little story. Back in August, I got a call from a reporter from Wired. He said, "Are you familiar with this idea of putting a filter on a box fan?" I said, "Oh yeah, that idea's been around for years. It's probably been around for 10 years. He said, how well does it work?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, but I love to mess with stuff. I'll find out." So I went out and bought a box fan and put some gasketing on the air intake side of the box fan and started doing some testing with a 1, 2, and 4 inch filter. So he writes the article, and the article is, "Could a janky jury-rigged air purifier help fight COVID-19? Indoor air experts think, sure, maybe. Why the hell not? We convinced the CEO of an air filter company to give it a try." Well, that CEO was me. So how well did it perform? Got a particle counter, use a Lighthouse handheld 3016 IAQ particle counter. Has 6 channels, 3.3 microns, 0.5 microns, 1 micron, 2.5, 5, and 10. What we found was that we removed 26% of the 0.3, 42% of the 0.5, 59 of the 1, 86 of the 5 micron, and for some reason 75 of the 10 micron. Let's just call that statistical error. So it's a pretty effective device. Here's the interesting thing. Those of us in the filter industry know that the more filter media you have, the less resistance you have, and the better airflow you have. But here's a great example of that in action. With the box fan with a MERV 13 1-inch filter gives you 320 feet per minute. The no filter is 780. Then you have a 2-inch, that's 400 feet a minute, and a 4-inch is 460 feet a minute. So thicker the filter, more media, the better the airflow. We all know that. So we decided to see how it did in real life. What was going on? These are outside counts. It's in a break room. This break room opens to the outside. And sometimes our employees leave the door open. So what are we seeing? Seen somewhat of a decrease, actually at 1 micron, a dramatic decrease. from 84,000 outside. These are all per cubic foot. By 8:30 in the morning, we're down to 11,500. At 5 microns, it's 2,800 down to 300. Then our workers go home at 3, and look what happens by 4. Even on the 0.3 microns, we're down to 228. And at 5 microns, we're 0, 10 microns, 0, and 1 micron, 5,500. Pretty dramatic increases from a box fan with a MERV 13 filter. What this really shows to the industry is the MERV 13 filter is a very effective filter for removing the target particles that carry COVID-19 as aerosols. Here's another example, a box fan with a MERV 13 filter in an office, but this has very light traffic. We put it in there at 1250, have very high particle counts, but very little traffic. By 5 o'clock, we're down not over 90% in all of the categories in each one of the channels from 0.3 to 10 microns. One of the advantages of this is that you think about it. This has a 4-inch filter on it. It's going at 460 feet a minute. This is a room that's 20 feet by 25 feet, 8-foot ceilings. We're getting a tremendous amount of air changes per hour out of this janky, jury-rigged air purifier, and it can do a good job. If we can get the same type of performance out of MERV 13 filters in HVAC systems, we can dramatically decrease particle counts in offices and other places where the HVAC systems are used. So I have a friend who's an indoor air expert, Dr. Richard Corsi from Portland State. For many years, he was at the University of Texas, and we did some things together. And he was in that Wired article as well. And he said, why don't you, I'm worried about the stress on the fan. Maybe we could put these filters on in a box. And his idea was to do a box made out of wood, but my idea was to do a box made out of filters and see what would happen. So we built a box, and just think about the surface area of the media here. These are all 2-inch filters. Built the box out of that, stuck it on the box fan, and that's what it looks like, side view. It's not very, it doesn't look very pretty, but it actually works really well. You can tell the drop in resistance 2 ways. One, we got 580 feet per minute on it. But the other thing is the noise from the fan goes down dramatically. So this variation actually performs well. It did about the same on the particle counts. So it's an interesting variation, again, showing the effectiveness of MERV 13 filters. Okay, I've said this, but my mission in this whole COVID thing is to make sure everybody wears a mask with a face shield. It is very dangerous to just wear a face shield without a mask. So I created this little man, I called him Hairy Manny. And Kathleen Owen, I think you're on, and you're right, I do enjoy all this stuff. I have a ball creating these things. So this is actually a mannequin with some strings hanging down. We turn on a fan at about the same speed that you would be walking if you had this face shield on. And take a look at what happens here. Those little strings go toward the breathing zone. So somebody walking with a face shield, what happens is the air comes to this point. There's actually negative pressure that builds up behind the shield and draws the particles from in that cloud that somebody's walking through, many of which could contain aerosols, COVID-19 aerosols, directly into the breathing zone. So not only is it bad protection for aerosols, it actually works in the other direction. So here's another example with another face shield. This is the famous tissue test. and most of us in the filter business have done this before. You can use facial tissue or toilet tissue, but stick it up in the airflow and you'll have a pretty good direction of where it's going. So outside the shield, it's obviously going away from the source. Inside the shield, exactly the same thing takes place. It draws the air into the shield directly into the breathing zone of the wearer. So whenever somebody is wearing a face shield, make sure they wear a mask for protection. And here's Harry Manne with his face mask and a face shield. That's my program for today, and I thank you for your attention, and I will turn it over to Ellie.
Thanks very much, Jim. We appreciate it, especially Harry. Thanks for inviting him to the presentation. We like him a lot. So, I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Ellie Amirnaser. She is a CEO at qlair, and Dr. Amirnaser is a fiber and polymer scientist with more than 10 years experience in filtration technologies and clean air solutions. At qlair, she is dedicated to helping facility management professionals be more efficient in their building operations and indoor environment control. Next. Please welcome me in joining and welcoming Dr. Ellie Amirnaser. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch. Thank you, Jim, for a great presentation. My name is Ellie. Mitch had a very generous introduction. Thank you very much. In the next few minutes, I will actually focus on talking about some solutions that can help for reopening. I think Mitch opened up and discussed in detail about what it really means if there is pollution inside the building, and in the next few slides I'll talk about how we can actually take some preventive actions, not to reduce the risk to zero, but actually to somehow that it's safe and efficient for everybody inside the building. So the objective for this presentation is really to identify and understand the strategies that's coming for post-COVID-19 for reopening and addressing some common challenges. Looking at new ways that can increase the building operating efficiency and then environmental safety. And then how can we implement a data-driven approach to both indoor air quality management and HVAC system management and optimization inside your building. So it's totally a new world. 2020 is becoming more challenging, and it's really an unprecedented time with we don't know when it's going to end, and there are common challenges that a lot of facility managers are facing, and there are common tasks that they have to take. So the task that business owners, executives, and facility managers are dealing with right now is to develop a plan for safe and smooth reopening during and after COVID-19, ensuring that health and safety guidelines are met with diligence after reopening, and also preparing the equipment to operate correctly and efficiently. There are a lot of strategies that might concern you that driving the cost up and might not be even applicable for the equipment that you have in your building. And this is where we want to discuss how we can help. So currently, I'm sure everybody read the news. There's a lot of information out there about the mode of transmission and how you can prevent. Jim briefly on his first slides talked about different strategies for preventions of the transmission. I just categorize them in 3 different groups based on what we hear outside. Contact transmission, which is basically touching the high contact area surfaces like tables, doorknobs, handshake with people. And the prevention strategies recommended by experts is to do surface disinfection, improve the cleaning schedule inside your building, and making sure that everybody wash their hands as much as you can control. Respiratory transmission is direct in very close distance. It's when the virus is actually transmitted through speaking, coughing, sneezing, and also singing, shouting inside a closed space in a very close area. It can actually be in a big droplets. And the recommendation is to do social distancing and using mask and protective equipment, personal protective equipments. The last one, which recently got a lot of attention with WHO not trying to admit it, but then a lot of scientists writing a letter to WHO, and then more and more research coming out, is airborne transmission. That means that the virus can actually transmit through long distances. It can actually stay and survive in the smaller droplets and stay in the air up to 30 minutes. Right now, I heard that it's even more than that. That it can linger around the air by sticking to fine dust inside the air, or you have proper environment for the virus to survive. For example, lower humidity and higher polluted area. For this, prevention strategy is really recommended by ASHRAE and CDC to improve the ventilation and filtration purification, the way that Jim was actually talking about it. One of the things is to understand where can be the high risk and where can be the low risk or safe area, is to do monitoring. This is where I'm going to focus on in the next few slides. So indoor air quality impacts on safety and reopening was addressed by a lot of accredited resources. For example, CDC and ASHRAE talking about how airborne exposure to particulate matter, especially PM2.5, can increase the risk of transmission and risk of infection. There is a study from Harvard School of Public Health that talking about percentage of the risk that can be increased when a person is exposed to PM2.5 for a certain period of time. For this reason, there's a lot of research being done on how air conditioning inside the building actually can increase the risk of transmission. Duke University here actually developed a risk score calculator that can tell you, what is the risk that the transmission can happen, based on some of the air quality parameters like PM2.5, CO2 level, which is an indication of lack of fresh air inside the building, and also the humidity. I will dig into that a little bit more as we move forward. I want to bring your attention about this air conditioning restaurant case study that was done right at the beginning. This is in an enclosed area which almost has no fresh air in there. It's mainly done recirculating with these split top PTAC systems it's not only poorly ventilated with outdoor ventilation, but also poorly filtrated. This actually study is very interesting. That showed how one infected person can be the start of infecting others if your building is not ventilated properly or filtrated properly. So we're hearing a lot of strategies. I think Jim actually talked about them a little bit. I kind of came out and categorized them about the recommendation that's coming from ASHRAE. Mainly, one of the biggest one is building ventilation, increasing outdoor air ventilation, introducing fresh air as much as 100% inside your building. The concern about that is it can increase the cost of your operation, or basically energy cost, very, very high quickly. At the same time, it can reduce the life of your equipment, and that is like a legit concern to have. The other one is mechanical filtration, which is recommended by ASHRAE to use MERV 13 and or MERV 14. Jim actually showed it scientifically how this can actually affect your building and improve the air quality inside your building. The concern can be, well, what if my ventilation system cannot handle MERV 13 and 14? There is a lot of HVAC system air handling units, of course. Healthcare hospital, they are designed to handle, like, for example, even HEPA filtration level, but somewhere in, like, you know, universities, classrooms, office spaces, hotels, they might not be available or like capable of taking these. What are my alternatives? Then talking about the retrofit solution, you hear a lot about different solutions that are out there, from air ionization to UV lights, and for example, HEPA filtration, air cleaner. What are the ones that is useful for you? Just not going and buying everything and not making sure that it's actually effective. So the purpose or the goal is to actually make an informed decision on ventilation and purification strategy with continuous air quality monitoring is very key. And the reason we do that is because we live in a data-driven world, and we want to be able to use that to make a really informed decision. The process to go through, and I think it's kind of what you're doing on a daily basis, is you collect data. That's what actually Jim did. Analyze that data, make informed decision, and then improve your experience, your customer experience, protecting your asset, increasing either revenue coming in if you are like, you know, in an industry like hotel or entertainment, or increasing the safety of your building or of your tenants inside the building. That's why we recommend to actually adjust the level of ventilation and optimize the occupancy rate based on measured air quality factors. For example, the PM 2.5, fine dust of 2.5 micron, can be an indication, by research has been shown that it's an indication of kind of how much dust or virus can actually be inside the building. It's kind of like a proxy. CO2 level is actually indication of amount of fresh air inside your building per person. So if you have an empty building and nobody is in there, and you have like, you know, your building running on low ventilation, your CO2 level might stay between 500 to 600 ppm. Giving like an idea about what is the CO2 level outside in the fresh air and without any anything like kind of enclosing the compartment. So it is about 400 to 450 ppm. So when you come inside the building, you have between 500 to 600 ppm. As soon as people started coming in and started breathing and exhaling the CO2, this can go up to, if it's zero ventilation, can go up to very quickly 2000 ppm if you have everything closed and you have more than 20 people in a very small room. But by the monitoring system that we did for a while, we realized that, and we can actually calculate that, but we realized that for a small space with, like, you know, 10 people inside that space breathing, and you have like a standard ventilation, your CO2 level can be between 800 to 1200 ppm, depending on how the ventilation is set up and how much time people stay inside. The recommendation right now for keeping the CO2 level or like fresh air enough for individuals is to keep the CO2 level below 800 ppm. Something that I think Jim brought up in terms of having the right filtration system in your building. You look at your HVAC filtration, and currently a lot of filtration systems are set up as MERV 8. And if you want to increase it to any higher scale, and you're worried about if it's kind of effective and if it's putting pressure on your system, this is a good way to kind of take a look at it. We ran a test and we looked at outdoor particulate level versus indoor particulate level with a MERV 8 rating that we had in place. If you look at this graph right here, you see that the outdoor, when there is a peak outside, the indoor is kind of following. But then your filtration system is actually removing about 70 to 75% of your of the particulate level over here. But then that filtration system is good for PM10. But if you look at it, it's not pretty effective for PM 2.5. So you see that the peak of PM 2.5 is almost like with a little bit of delay is following. Your MERV 8 is removing about 25 to 30% of the particle coming from outside. But then there is room for improvement to actually look into this. So by looking at this, you want to know, especially if you're in the areas with like, if it's high pollen season, or if you're in California with like wildfire, you want to make sure that you have a proper filtration system that can not only reduce the PM10, but also the PM 2.5 coming from outside to inside your building. Second case studies that we did was, again, looking at the outdoor versus indoor, and this time improving the the filtration system from MERV 8 to MERV 13. So this is like an empty building. It was shut down for quite a while and nobody was in there. But again, you look at it, that the indoor air pollution, or PM level, PM 2.5, is following the same pattern as the outdoor. Here is the 4th of July. That's why you see the big peak outside, but also you see that some of those smoke from the fireworks can kind of sneak inside your building. On July 21st, we improved the filtration system to MERV 13. We sealed the filter and we cleaned the coils and everything, and you see how drastically the particulate matter that was coming from outside could be reduced to not completely zero. This one is showed zero, but it's somewhere between 1 or 2 microgram per cubic meter. The lesson learned here is that improving the filtration system is effective. It can be effective. From what tests that Jim actually did to this one that is based on real data coming from outside to inside. However, again, I want to emphasize that if your building cannot handle MERV 13, that's totally fine. You want to make sure that you keep your particulate level below 10 microgram per cubic meter recommended by Harvard School of Public Health. As long as you do that, you can actually reduce the risk of airborne transmission of the COVID-19. So this is kind of emphasizing what I mentioned about measuring, continuous measuring of PM 2.5 level, making sure that you are looking at not only outdoor, but also indoor pollution sources. You might have a very good air quality from outside, doing everything for indoor air, for keeping outdoor air pollution coming to inside the building. But when you have people running around, walking around, coughing, you can actually create more dust. And this is where you want to, if you see that this level is exceeding with having those steps taking care of your HVAC system, you want to have additional air filtration unit, like a retrofit solution to remove that fine dust. The filter in the box is a brilliant idea. There are a lot of air cleaners that are like, you know, advertised as HEPA filtration air cleaner, or even smaller one, which has higher class, is highly recommended. But you can also take a look at where you exactly need to put these areas. You don't have to populate all of your building, the whole building, with these air cleaners, but only the places that shows, for example, these particulates can exceed the healthy level. Another thing that I touch point about the safety of the building is what is the safe occupancy rate inside your building. This actually is like a recommended level of CO2 level inside a building, and what the ventilation rate can be. With a little easy math, and we can definitely help you with that. You can take a look at your setting of the ventilation and see how much CFM I need to provide for people inside my building, and also how many people I should allow in a space, in a conference room, in a classroom, or in an enclosed area. So as I said, the recommended level right now is to keep your fresh air below 1,000, highly recommended to below 800 ppm. And based on that, we can actually easily calculate what is the maximum number of people allowed in the space. If you want to allow 100% fresh air, it is recommended by CDC to keep the air exchanges inside your building about 6 air exchange per hour. So if you have, like, you know, an average fresh airflow going to a space of 450 CFM, and this is like a case study that we did for a little classroom or space that we did, and you have this size of the room, then to be able to provide a target level of CO2 below 800 ppm, you can allow 22 people in that space. However, we know that this fresh air rate can increase your utility bill. So if you wish to go lower than 100% fresh air to keep that 600 ACH, then you need to reduce the number of people inside the building. It's an easy calculation. We can definitely help you with that if you're interested. So the conclusion of my talk was to make sure that you make an informed decision before rushing to trying everything, or because it's very overwhelming, all the information coming to do this and that and that, totally ignore it, or kind of making like like an overview or a sloppy job of keeping your building efficient and safe. The recommendation is really to do air quality monitoring in a continuous manner, keeping the humidity level between 40 to 60%, keeping the fine dust level below 10 microgram per cubic meter, and then also keeping the carbon dioxide level below 800 ppm by 2 things: limiting the number of people inside the space, introducing enough fresh air per person inside your building. Thank you. Mitch?
Thank you, Dr. Amirnaser. I appreciate your talk. It was very informative. Now I'd like to ask the audience to ask any questions that you might have.
So you're talking about bringing inside air or outside air in. What about in the states where it's hot and humid and you're actually pulling humidity into your building? You're not going to want to have a lot of that outside air coming in because it does work your system very, very hard.
That's a good question. One of the things that, Jim, sorry, I'm just jumping first. You can go ahead after me. Sorry. One of the things that is very important is to have enough air exchange inside your building. And by that air exchange, we mean clean air exchange. You can still recirculate the cooled air inside your building as long as you make sure that air is filtrated. So if you wish to actually have, for example, 50% recirculated air and 50% fresh air, then we recommend to add the air cleaners, that they also come with like the air exchange per hour specification that you can use to make sure that's a safe environment for your building, if that answers your questions.
Yeah, and there are other issues like in California or Colorado with wildfires. I mean, having open windows and really high particle concentrations outside is not a good idea. You're not going to be bringing in fresh air, so it's a trade-off. And obviously, breathing smoke is not a good idea, or having really high humidity is not a good idea. So there has to be a balance, and some of the markers, CO2 is a pretty good marker to look at. Humidity levels are a pretty good level to look at. In those situations, there's no absolute correct answer. It is something that needs to be monitored, looked at, adjusted. Every day there needs to be some monitoring to make sure that the decisions that are being made for HVAC system and filtration, fresh air intake are correct.
Okay. We have a question from Dr. Owen. Dr. Owen?
There's also some questions in the chat.
Yeah, I was going to say, my question was, I wrote in the chat, but my question is about wildfire areas and IQ, which Jim just mentioned, but I wrote my question before he said it. But a lot of people I'm getting calls and questions about what people should do. And my answers I'm not real sure, because it's not just particles, it's also semi-VOCs and VOCs. And I don't want to set somebody up with, run a filter and then your building's going to stink forever because of off-gassing. So what kind of answers do you suggest in places like that? I mean, especially since we don't want to have them do anything that's going to cause them more harm with the COVID.
Well, one idea is to go back to that janky air purifier. I mean, as ridiculous as it looks and sounds, it actually pulls a lot of air through a MERV 13 filter without having exposure to the outside. So I know in prior wildfires, that's where this thing has been used quite frequently with success. So there are some alternatives. Certainly an air purifier, a HEPA air purifier would be a great idea. Yeah. But bringing smoky air inside a building is not a very healthy thing to do, even with COVID-19.
And just one more thing, the air purifiers that are out there have good alternatives to use, for example, carbon filters as well that can be added to reduce the VOC. Or there are other solutions like, for example, air ionizers that we had a very good success in the healthcare industry to reduce the VOC. So there are retrofit solutions that you can use to reduce the VOC coming inside the building, making sure that you have enough fresh air as well as clean air inside your building that is not harming people.
Okay.
If you have data on ionizers that's good scientific data of how they worked, I would love to see that, because we keep getting data on them that is missing big chunks. So
the ionizer
talk to me after.
Absolutely, sure.
Because on the ETF, we're having a lot of issues with people wanting to use those and not being able to find good data. But thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I can share with you the effect of ionizer on VOC for sure.
Okay, we have another question from Nick. Nick, would you like to go ahead and ask your question?
Absolutely. Thanks for allowing me to speak. I had to unmute myself.
Sure.
Number one, I appreciate what Kathleen asked for, because absolutely trying to understand the removal mechanism of ionization seems a little complex, but I certainly would like to understand it a little bit more. My question is, and it revolves around the concern where we're trying to fight a war against viruses and microbes, and we're just throwing ionization and UV light, and viruses and microbes have been around for 3 billion years, and they seem to morph into something that's different, and they just keep winning the war. You can't get rid of them. And my concern is that we're not talking a lot about ventilation and proper filtration with ventilation systems, and not trying to have this war where we're trying to throw UV light or ionization, and while it works on day one, the concern is when it starts to fade out and it's not doing what it should be doing, and what controls can be put in to assure that these electronic devices are going to maintain their intensity levels so that they are generating what's needed to be generated to assure, for lack of better words, a kill, or effectively making a virus inactive accordingly, and not necessarily generating a superbug.
Let me answer that if I could, because I have a different view than Ellie. I am not a fan of ionizers. I'm not a fan of ozone. I mean, I have been fighting this stuff for over 20 years, and I'm with Kathleen. I've not seen any good peer-reviewed studies showing the efficacy of ionizers or other devices of that nature, bipolar, whatever you want to call it. I've just not seen it, and I'd certainly I could be persuaded. I'm skeptical. I don't feel like that's the best direction to go in. I think that we need to be looking at better ventilation, better filtration. And my hope, and your comment is right, we've been fighting this stuff for many years. One of my favorite books is The Great Influenza by John Barry. And the surprising thing is how many mistakes were made in 1918 that we're making in 2020 all over again. And the nice takeaway would be that we learn that building buildings with better ventilation and using higher filtration is the way of the future. And you're not going to get rid of viruses. They've been around for not thousands of years, millions of years, and they have a pretty effective way of reproducing. But we can build buildings better. We can create better indoor air quality, and hopefully, when all this is done, that'll be the result. We'll be doing better filtration and better ventilation.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely, 100% agree.
Thank you.
And I want to add something to Jim's point. I think Jim, I totally agree with you on the bipolar ionization. They advertise them as like a solution for the whole thing, and we realize that it's not true. There are, based on some data, we saw that they can be very helpful for VOCs, but not particles, for example, which they sometimes they advertise as like a solution for everything. But one thing to Nick's point is that I really would like to, and that's my mission also at qlair, is to make sure that we understand that the time of trying everything and anything without knowing that they are effective or not is kind of coming to an end. we need to make sure that we make informed decision based on data that can be available and can be collected from your building. So by looking at those data prior to installing any solution, picking the right solution, and after that, looking at that data to make sure that data is effective. And also, Nick, you brought a good point. It's like, you know, these solutions are not sitting there forever. There is an end life for them, and you need to either exchange them or upgrade them or something. And by looking at the data, you can also see if your solution is effective, or, like, you know, the air quality parameters are getting out of whack, and then now you have to do something to improve that or upgrade this, the system. So that's what I wanted to add to Jim's point, that definitely it's good to look into the ventilation and filtration, but you have tons of selection, tons of material to select from. You know, you have different filter companies, they have different filter grades, you have big portfolio of products that you can pick from. And then I always scratch my head and says, like, well, which one is the right solution? Is by looking at the data prior to that, defining a base hit or a healthy baseline for your building, and then making sure that kind of you're hovering around that healthy baseline with the solution that you select.
Absolutely. That data is paramount in anything we do moving forward. It's like that check engine light in your car that's just staring at you all the time. Every time you're in your car, that you gotta do something, and if you don't, it's this big red check engine light. So I absolutely agree. Database decisions, service decisions is paramount, especially when it's preventative, which is what I think we need there. Out of curiosity, does anybody recall, I watched something where the president of ASHRAE mentioned that ionization is not being recommended. Does anybody recall anything along those lines?
I recall that.
There is an article which I also read, and I have to forward it. They don't mention, like, completely, like, not recommended, but say that it's not as effective as you think, something like this. I have to go.
The position in the task force and of the bigger end of ASHRAE is that we are not commenting on it. We're not recommending or not recommending, if that makes sense. But
Another question online, and it has to do with, you know, people being in an urban area. You increase fresh air intake, and you're bringing in dirty air. I mean, you got very high levels of PM 2.5 and PM 10. Are we just trading one problem for another? And to me, the answer to that is we probably are. But these are unique times, and we have to make decisions as to whether or not the dilution of potential COVID-19 in the air is a good trade-off with bringing in outside air that may not be perfectly clean. And we'd like to have both. It'd be great to have low particle counts and low CO2, but that's not always the case. So my position would be that right now, it's better to have low CO2 with good ventilation. Going back to that example that I had, that room the first room that we did was a break room with the door opening to the outside. People are going in and out. They're cooking with a microwave, and there's actually a stove in there as well, and pretty good traffic of people. I kept thinking, you know, close the door, because I can't get good particle counts because you're not closing the door. And then I said, you know, that's really not the answer. The answer is, how do you make the room safer? So I went in with my little CO2 counter, and CO2 is 490 parts per million. I mean, it's a pretty safe room. It may not have really low particle counts. They're lower because the box fan with a filter on it is in there, but it's a pretty safe room. It's pretty much like the outside. That's what you're looking for.
Yep. I have a question here for both, either one of you. If everyone in the urban area is increasing their fresh air intake rate and utilities are fossil fuel powered, i.e. coal or natural gas, that increases the 2.5 and the PM 2.5 and the 10 in the ambient air inherently. So how is increasing exterior air helping?
Mitch, that's exactly the question I just answered, so I'll leave that up.
I'm sorry, I apologize. Sorry, I was looking at something, I was doing something else, I apologize.
It's all right. We'll give you a quiz on my answer.
Well, we have another one from Tushar with COVID-19 overtook the real long-term issue of PM 2.5 and PM1. You think the people across the globe will really be worried about 2.5 or during the post-COVID era?
Well, something to mention about people's behavioral change is that they become more conscious about air quality around them. You know, it's not that they know PM 2.5. You tell them it will be over. It was over my head when I started this, you know, but they are more concerned about air quality inside the building. So if they feel it's stuffy, if it feels smelly, if it's any of these, they will be more concerned. The number of complaints about the air quality is more, and people become more concerned, you know, and want a solution that can help these to go away. So that's what I would say. Like, might not be the concern about PM1 and PM 2.5 in particular, but the consequences of like having a poor indoor air quality can be detected, because people are more sensitive, can be detected much more easier by people. Before, if somebody was coming to you or like thinking, oh, my headache is because I didn't sleep well last night, or I ate bad or something, might kind of shift a little bit, oh, might be the air quality is bad. They don't know which parameter is bad in there. Is it CO2 level? Is it VOC? Is it PM level? But it's the concern of, like, in general, air is bad, air quality inside this building. So the job of the experts and the facility managers is to make sure, based on the scientific data, they keep the air quality in a healthy level. And if they receive complaints that are not relevant, they have evidence to show, like, look, all these parameters are looking good. So you might have been sleeping bad last night or having a bad food. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think that the emphasis that we have today on indoor air quality is going to have an effect on the world 5 years from now or 10 years from now or whatever. And you know, the question is, well, how does the world change after a pandemic? And you know, the 1920s, the United States was a great example of how things changed. Everything from the Roaring 20s to Art Deco was really created because of the effects of people going through that pandemic. And there are going to be changes that come out of this. And I think one of them is, I don't think we're going back on indoor air quality. I think we're going forward, and people are going to be more aware of it and be able to do, the people who are studying it and working on it are going to be able to be more successful in getting awareness of indoor air quality. Things are going to change. They're changing now.
Yeah.
Agreed. So I think we're just about at time right now. So I'm going to go ahead and close this for questions. If there are any questions that are in the queue right now, we will send you an email to answer those questions and to make sure that they're answered. I do want to move on, and thank you, both Ellie and Jim. Thank you very much for your participation, and thank you all for coming to this webinar. I hope it was as informing as it was for me, and I hope that you come again. I do want to remind everyone that we do at Waterloo Filtration, we will have an IQ Health and Safety Solutions seminar again, December 15th and 16th. This will be a 2-day event, 4 hours each day. And so I'd urge you all to go to our website and register for that if you're interested. I also want to thank all of our members at Waterloo Filtration Institute for participating and helping us grow this venue for education. And with that, I'll conclude this